And welcome. Thank you so much for joining the Jefferson Educational Society's digital program, Commonwealth of Innovation, a policy agenda for revitalizing Pennsylvania's economic dynamism. I'm Ben Speggen. I'm the vice president at the Jefferson. I'll be here to introduce this event, then turn things over to our guests for a presentation. Then I'll return to moderate a conversation with them, including taking questions from you, the viewers tuned in live. The JES team will be taking those questions in the comment section of the JES's Facebook event page. If you have a question, just please share it there, and we're going to work our way through as many questions from you as we can. And of course, if you're watching this program at a later date, streaming it on demand, still leave us your questions, your comments to keep this conversation going. Now, of course, I'd like to thank our speakers, Mr. Mark Muro and Robert Maxim, for presenting their research and findings today. Welcome to them. I'm going to offer a brief bio for both of those. Of course, deeper bios you can find at brookings.edu. Now, Mark is a senior fellow at Brookings Metro, focused on the interplay of technology, people, and place as they are altered by disruptions. In addition to a deep dive into Indiana's transforming economy, Mark's most recent work has focused on the geography of the digital economy, including as it has been affected by COVID-19 and the recession. It involves the diverging fortunes of superstar cities, places that are left behind. Current work from Mark also explores the geography of AI economy and inclusive tech, building on earlier reports such as what jobs are affected by AI, automation and artificial intelligence, how machines are affecting people and places, the digitalization of the American workforce. He holds a bachelor's degree from Harvard University and a master's degree in American Studies from the University of California, Berkeley. Outside of Brookings, Mark has provided informal counsel exclusively to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's transition team. One of the things we'll talk about today, the impact of this report now with current government. Now, Mr. Robert Maxim is a senior research associate in Brookings Metro. He conducts research and designs policy proposal for Brookings Metro's Managing Disruptions portfolio, exploring how economic trends like technological change and globalization affect people and places. His recent work has been focused on measuring the effects of automation and artificial intelligence on U.S. workers, encouraging economic growth and inclusion in the U.S. heartland states, and supporting the well-being of regional public universities. He's also written on the geography of the COVID-19 recession, U.S. innovation policy, the gig economy, and contingent work, and the effects of U.S. tariffs and trade policy. Previously, Rob served as a senior analyst at the Boston Consulting Group and as a research associate at the Council on Foreign Relations. He holds a master's degree in international trade and investment policy and a bachelor's degree in economics and international affairs. Both are from George Washington University, and he is a citizen of the Mashpee Wanapog tribe. What brings them here together today is their recent Brookings Metro report, Commonwealth of Innovation, a policy agenda for revitalizing Pennsylvania's economic dynamism. Such a great title. We used it for this very program. Now, together, Mark and Rob and their Brookings colleague Yang Yu write, few states, quote, few states possess as many assets needed for innovation-driven growth as Pennsylvania. Powerhouse research universities are working on the most critical issues of the day in life sciences, artificial intelligence, robotics, transportation, and energy. Breakout companies are making headlines and garnering major investments, and the diversity of talent in the state's cities and rural areas is contributing to a rich capacity for community-based innovation at a time when creativity and inclusion matter more and more. And yet, for all of that, Pennsylvania has not been able to convert its assets into abundant, high-quality economic growth or broad-based employment across an array of high-tech, high-paid advanced industries. Given that, Pennsylvania needs to unlock its innovation potential, which will require catalytic steps on the part of state government. Now, their report, which is available at brookings.edu and will be shared in the comment section of this event page, reviews Pennsylvania's major innovation trends and challenges and suggests a set of state-level policy recommendations with an eye toward helping the new governor energize the state's innovation sector. Overall, the report draws several key conclusions that we'll review and discuss here. Now let's turn things over to Mr. Mark Muro and Mr. Robert Maxim, co-authors of Commonwealth of Innovation, a policy agenda for revitalizing Pennsylvania's economic dynamism, to discuss their findings and recommendations. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ben, and everybody on today for turning out to listen and participate. Ben, Brookings, and Jefferson Society are truly old friends on economic themes. So my colleague Rob and I are delighted to give you a quick look at our new report, Commonwealth of Innovation. If we can see bring the slides up, we can start moving through that. Great, thank you. If we go to slide 2, you can see a look at the report. This is a follow-up to an earlier report we did in 2019. This is the new report. The earlier one was also funded by the Hillman Foundation of Pittsburgh. Our report was designed from the outset to be a level set of, a very urgent moment in the state. And a chance to set out an agenda for re-energizing the state's innovation economy at, frankly, a time of drift. It's a statewide check-in on a state that really has work to do to get back on the offensive. That the governor-elect is already signaling a new day on these issues makes it a good time to have this conversation and just to really lay out some of the key needed priorities. If we go to the next slide, I'll just touch on what we plan to do today. We're going to first go through the state's drifting situation on innovation, and then we're going to suggest some policy-related problems, and then some corresponding recommendations. We're going to keep it tight so there's plenty of time to talk. So here knowing that the Jefferson Society and our friend Ralph Ford at Penn State Barron's and others have kept the Erie region well informed on innovation, let's dig right into the trends as we see it. Right here you can see that Pennsylvania really does have a rich innovation history that most states would actually kill for. Some of the starting points that Pennsylvania has. Strong R1 and R2 universities, including powerhouses like Penn, Pitt, and CMU, and institutions like Penn State Barron, which itself is a unique economic driver. For years, likewise, the state was an innovator and innovation, we like to say. It was good at policy around this, and by creating the Ben Franklin, creating the Ben Franklin Technology Partnerships, and then the Life Science Greenhouse Initiative and the Keystone Innovation Zone tax credits. These were all noteworthy nationally significant innovations. What's more, supporting innovation was a bipartisan tradition until recently. Governor Thornburgh created the Ben Franklin Technology Partners, and Governor Casey continued it. Governor Ridge and Rendell were each supporters of tech-based economic development. So that's a great history, but it is history, I have to say. If we go to the next slide, the state has been increasingly adrift, there's that word again, on innovation activities. With multiple governors, I have to say, largely AWOL on this particular set of topics. And here you can see the benchmarkings of the state relatively static. Here's how the state has been ranked on dozens of innovation metrics by two of the leading state innovation and capacity and outcomes index, one from the Milken Institute and one from ITIF, a noted innovation think tank in Washington. For 20 years, quite frankly, the state has been stuck as a second echelon player despite these top flight assets, and it's been going sideways. You can see really no major movement up or down. These don't move rapidly in general, but this state is a second echelon player with first echelon assets. Let's go to the next slide. Because innovation matters so much to economic performance, meanwhile, the state's innovation drift is resulting in broader economic drift that people feel. For one thing, Pennsylvania is struggling with plotting sub-average productivity on the left and income growth on the right. Pennsylvania is the dark blue line. And you can contributing this, let's go to the next slide, and directly related to the innovation shortcoming has been the sub-average advanced industries growth. That's PA again in the dark blue, pretty lackluster. Here, I mean, advanced industries are critical because these high value export driven industries matter inordinately to creating good jobs, robust supply chains, and regional prosperity. So those advanced industries are crucial to have, but the state is seeing fairly flat growth in those. Let's go to the next slide. You can see that the state has been building up some compelling advanced sector industry clusters, however, particularly in the life sciences and the Philly area, and in computer and information systems, AI, robotics, and automation in greater Pittsburgh. And I should note in this connection that the Erie area is developing relationships to those specializations. The Biomedical Translational Research Partnership you have with Maggie Women's Research Institute, and the investment research and grant funding coming through that into the region. And it shows how a second smaller scale region can connect with one of these superstar innovation centers like Pittsburgh. And then the growing partnership with CMU on vehicle electrification and the opportunities it brings to funding and economic growth are something to see how this region can connect to these other crucial bigger clusters that are taking shape. So that's a point of a possible upside. And yet, going to the next slide, the fact remains it's been a tough decade for Metro Erie. Advanced industry growth, the top line measure again of innovation's benefit to real people, continues to slump, heavily affected by the GE losses earlier in the decade. And then in the next slide, new tech firm formation in the Erie advanced sector, central to dynamism, that creation of new enterprises within advanced industries, like everywhere in the state, has been ticking downwards. Now, this is again a secular trend in the country, but it's a challenge for Pennsylvania. And here you can see that stepping down and going the wrong direction. Now, let's go to the next slide. So those are a few of the very mixed trends underway in the state here. But I want to turn to the underlying sources of the problems we see, and a few of the recommendations we've been making, including has been noted to the Shapiro transition. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Rob, but I want to first just touch base on the overarching structure that we are working with here. Basically, we highlight 4 priority themes for unlocking the innovation capacity of the state and promoting greater participation and innovation for people and places of all kinds. At the top, you can see the first one. We are really challenging the state now to commit to innovation. It really hasn't so far, but we're saying commit to innovation. The state needs to try harder, be more visible, be more active. And the state has assets, as we've said, but they're not being nurtured and supported and linked. They're not being talked about. The state needs to do more to galvanize excitement. Beneath that, though, we call 3 needed themes for serious work. These entail accelerating commercialization in the major university hubs like Pittsburgh. And regardless, the state absolutely is dependent on Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Those are the core engines. Those engines need to be nurtured. They need to be accelerated. And the rest of the state needs to be connected better to them. The second theme, though, is fostering innovation in the rest of the state, namely smaller metros like Erie. We're going to talk about that. And then insisting on inclusion, not just across place, but across all neighborhoods, across all demographies. And we think that is absolutely crucial for the state now. So with that, Rob's going to look at the cross-cutting vision and the three themes at once here. So Rob, you want to jump in?
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, as Mark alluded to, I'm going to turn to detail some of the factors that we've identified that are really driving the trends Mark just discussed, as well as our policy agenda that we've assembled to respond to these challenges. So moving on to the next slide. Our first point is that, as Mark alluded to, Pennsylvania state government has in recent years lacked a clear commitment to supporting innovation. So as we show on the right here, even with the modest boost to innovation funding in the most recent state budget, Pennsylvania's innovation funding is really just a fraction of where it was prior to the Great Recession in 2008 to 2009. And then, beyond that, Pennsylvania lags several peer states when it comes to investment in areas like technology transfer and other related innovation investments. So, in particular, Ohio spends about 5 times what Pennsylvania spends in a typical year on innovation investments. So, in response to that, and moving on to the next slide here, we really see the need for 3 key policy areas. The first is Pennsylvania's state leaders really need to set a vision for innovation. So that consists of the governor and other state leaders leveraging the bully pulpit to convey the importance of innovation and the need for policy supports. And we think that government leaders should also convene business leaders from across the state to develop a new innovation strategy commission with the goal of publishing a state innovation strategy to guide the state. And we think that strategy should be updated at regular intervals. Next, we think the Commonwealth needs to center innovation in its economic development activities. So that means, in addition to a commitment from the governor, he should also appoint innovation champions to other high-level economic development positions in the state. And then we identify a variety of moves that the governor could make to elevate the cause of innovation, such as updating the mission of DCED to more clearly embrace innovation, and elevating the importance of the Office of Technology and Entrepreneurship. And then the Commonwealth needs to rebuild its innovation budget. So the state, needs to shore up its core innovation programs, things like the BENS and the life sciences greenhouses. But it also needs to begin making new investments into communities across the state, which I'll detail more in a minute. So moving on to the next slide here. And I don't know if anyone else is getting an echo, Mark. I wonder if, maybe there's some feedback on your end. If you maybe want to hop on mute there. Yeah, thanks so much. So the next policy theme is all about maximizing the potential of the state's bigger city, Research One university-oriented startups and scale-ups to unlock more commercial activity and employment. So these, innovation systems, innovation ecosystems in Pennsylvania have been generating a ton of IP. But as you can see here, they're not converting their above average R&D into new firms and promising areas. In particular, Pennsylvania not only lags national leaders, but competitor states and the nation as a whole when it comes to new tech and innovation intensive firm formations. So given that, and moving on to the next slide, moving on to the next slide here. Yep. Are we able to get the next slide up? Great, thank you. In particular, we think that the state needs to enhance its investments into supporting the growth of science-based startups. So that consists of generating more bottom-up, regional-based ecosystem building at scale by challenging, university-based innovation communities in the state to compete when what we're calling a Pennsylvania Innovation Hubs program, which is a major $30 to $50 million grant, multiple major $30 to $50 million grants designed to advance compelling plans for regional innovation ecosystems to work together in unprecedented new ways to develop major sector-based innovation initiatives. And then, meanwhile, other aspects of this can mean embracing best practices that other states are already doing, such as doing more, help communities in the state with large innovation-focused federal funding opportunities, or things like establishing an SBIR and STTR program, state match, to further support startups in the state with winning federal funding. So moving now to the next slide, we think that one of the largest factors contributing to the state's economic drift is the fact that despite many great community level efforts across Pennsylvania, innovation is struggling in many of the smaller communities across the Commonwealth. So here, as you can see, here we show the change in share of advanced industries jobs in the state. And as you can see, Erie County has faced significant challenges on this metric, as Mark alluded to earlier. But our view is that there's a lot of great community level work being done right now to counter these trends. And in our report, we highlight several of these efforts, some of which are going on in Erie specifically. So on the policy side, we really think it's time for the state to offer greater support to innovation efforts already happening in communities across the state. So in terms of policy, what does that mean? So moving on to the next slide. The first is recommending that the state design and fund a regional challenge grant to go to smaller communities across the state with the aim of catalyzing regional economic innovation ecosystem development in those places. So this would be, a smaller grant analogous to, not only the larger ecosystem focused grant that I previously mentioned, but also, kind of a parallel to federal investments like the Build Back Better Regional Challenge Program. The goal here would really to be helping smaller market Pennsylvania regions, including Erie, strengthen their local ecosystem supports and nurture innovation, entrepreneurship, and cluster growth. So again, like I said, communities are already doing a lot of this on their own, but they need state support. And so the aim here is to provide state resources to enhance the type of efforts already going on. And then we have several other policy items aimed at smaller communities across the state. So the first is to establish an advanced industries innovation voucher program, which companies could use to pay universities to help them answer pressing innovation or product development question. And again, the goal here would be to spread the benefits of Pennsylvania's world-class research universities to more firms and communities across the state. And then finally, we think the state needs to continue building on the funding that the Penn State Launchbox Network has received in the most recent state budget. The reason we like this network is it's because it's an existing distributed network of nearly 30 locations across the state and communities of all sizes. Throughout our process, we spoke with several Penn State campus chancellors, including Chancellor Ford of Penn State Darren, and have gotten some really good insights both into the interesting work that they're doing to support innovation and ecosystem development, as well as the challenges to this program so far, given its relatively small initial investment. So we think there's significant potential, if that program is adequately resourced by the state. And then finally, moving on to the last challenge here. In addition to inequality by place, Pennsylvania's innovation and entrepreneurship system remains really unequal across different demographic groups. In particular, women, Latino, Hispanic, Black, and Indigenous workers and entrepreneurs are all greatly underrepresented. So on the right here, we show, just one example of the stark disparity in the state. This is the ownership of firms with employees in Pennsylvania. So despite accounting for over half of Pennsylvania's population, women are the majority owners of just 18% of employer firms in Pennsylvania. And as you can see, Latino or Hispanic and Black entrepreneurs each account for just 1% of employer firm ownership in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot that can and needs to be done on the inclusion front. And so moving on to the next slide here, I just note that while we have a variety of policy items here, we've got even more in the report. We don't have time to get into all of them here. We recognize that even fully enacting everything we laid out still wouldn't go far enough to rectify the racial and gender imbalances in Pennsylvania's innovation system. But broadly speaking, we see three themes that the Commonwealth can focus on when it comes to improving inclusion in innovation and entrepreneurship. The first is growing a more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. we note that the state is already taking some steps to this effect. Things like its efforts to center inclusion in the state small business credit initiative program. Other ideas we suggest include creating a state CDFI fund, growing the state's minority business development authority loan program, and better leveraging public procurement to support underrepresented entrepreneurs. From there, we think the state can do more to help get underrepresented workers into advanced industries careers. In the report, we note that there are a lot of great regional and local efforts attempting to do this already. So rather than reinvent the wheel, we think that the state can play a bigger role in funding and convening a variety of regional organizations already focused on connecting workers to advanced industries jobs. We also think the state can do a better job of funding things like childcare and other wraparound supports that can help workers access those jobs. And then finally, the Commonwealth can make STEM education more equitable from pre-K to higher education. So to do so, we suggest creating new programs, things like attracting diverse STEM professors and doctoral students at Pennsylvania universities, as well as creating more STEM research opportunities for diverse undergraduate students. But we also think that waiting until students get to higher education to support STEM learning is waiting for too long and intervening too late. And so as a result, we include several ideas in our report to bolster STEM education for underrepresented students at pre-K to 12 education, things like strengthening the Pennsylvania Department of Education's PA SMART grant program, which support STEM education in schools across the state, among other ideas. So that gives you a bit of a feel for our agenda. And so as he's discussed it today, we're really looking forward to the new governor engaging on innovation, both by elevating its priority and bringing real investments to it. So now I'll turn it back to Mark in case he has any additional items he wants to add. Mark, I think you might be on mute.
There's, I would just say there's a lot on the table, but a lot of to-dos have accumulated over the last 15 years. And we've heard a lot from Pennsylvanians who are really clamoring about innovation and acceleration of the economy. So, I think that this is a bare bones good start at putting Pennsylvania back in the leadership group among other states. And the concern here is that other states have doubled down on these issues, and Pennsylvania, which has superior starting points in some ways, has allowed itself to slip. So from there, why don't we're happy to answer any and all, have a good discussion. So back to you, Ben.
Yep, Mark, Rob, thank you so much. Again, what we're focused on here, folks, is their outstanding and really insightful report, Commonwealth of Innovation Policy Agenda for Revitalizing Pennsylvania's Economic Dynamism. Thank you, folks. A reminder, we are taking your questions when we're looking for those in the comment section of this event page as we're hosting this. I'm going to ask my colleague, Ms. Angela Beaumont, maybe she can pull down the slide deck so we can talk. And if you have a question about a specific slide deck, or a slide in the deck, we'll do our best to pull that back up so we can have that there as reference. Mark, I want to go right back to where you began. This report builds on previous work that you've done around innovation economies, including Pennsylvania. It looks that you and Rob have worked on with your colleagues at Brookings. And I want to ask you about the urgency, pulling on what Rob said right there at the end. In the moment, one, we have new governorship leadership. We have a new state legislature. We also have federal dollars being deployed in a way that they have not been in a long time, noting the pandemic. So there's federal funds that can be leveraged. There's a lot going on right now, which to me seems like this makes this urgent in the timing. Before I get to that, one more reminder, folks, your questions, we're going to take as many as we can. So we welcome those, or any comments you have, maybe you're experiencing what this report touches on or can lend to it. But Mark, if I can start with you, and then Rob will go to you, talk about that urgency of the report, the timeliness of it right now. What matters right now as we're ending January, about to turn the corner into February here in 2023?
Yeah, well, at the biggest picture, at the widest the widest perspective, innovation just matters more. Innovation is pervasive in more and more products. More and more products are technological in some way. And states, as we're both saying, have been doubling down on this. So there's no time to waste here. The state is actually, I think, in a precarious point where it could move forward or it could find itself in slipping. So that was, but yeah, there are other things happening. Obviously, a new administration with a new governor who seems to be very interested in these topics creates a moment of urgency. And absolutely the backdrop of federal funding, which we allude to several times, is an opportunity, but it's a time-stamped opportunity because other states are rushing after that money too. The state needs to be very organized about what it wants to be, how it is going to participate in these competitions. They're often competitions, by the way, and how can it support its regions in going after some of that. So a lot of things are happening at once, as you point out. So there's really no time to waste now.
Mark, thank you for that. And I want to dive into the middling of Pennsylvania for a minute. But Rob, for you, the urgency of this report now, action that can be taken now here in 2023, could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with everything Mark said. The thing I'd add maybe one point as well. I think that there's a moment of urgency around, the clusters that Pennsylvania is facing as well. When you think of everything from, the energy transition to the deployment of AI, automation, and robotics to the, shifting of supply chains in the aftermath of the pandemic. Now is really a moment where, the next decade plus of economic trends are going to be, begin to be set in stone. And so, really acting in this window over the next couple of years is going to be crucial if Pennsylvania wants to take advantage of how those trends will play out.
So really quick follow-up here, because we're talking about the new administration. How much of this is on the shoulders of the executive branch, and how much might the executive branch need to work with the legislative branch to lift the innovation economy in Pennsylvania? Other states that are doing it well, are you seeing just strong governors, be able to take the reins and really drive this progress, or is it a hand-in-hand or at least a shoulder-to-shoulder opportunity from the executive branch to work with state legislatures?
Yeah, there's no doubt that states and state policy is especially important in supporting technology and innovation development. It is very hard to imagine the state truly flourishing on this front without an active, supportive state government. So I think we can stipulate that. I think we should assume that. So state policy matters. Pennsylvania historically has been good at innovation policy. It can be good again. It should be good. With that said, the second point that Rob and I are adamant about is there is no substitution for addressing the significant erosion of the innovation budget in this state in the last 10 years. It's demonstrable. You can cut the numbers lots of different ways. It's always the same story, though, of a massive decline in effort. And so there's no way around, an engagement on the budget. And we have some ideas for raising funds, but there has to be the creation of a major pool of flexible funding, not tied down to multiple specific little programs, but allowing, we think these substantial challenge grants for big places and medium-sized places. And that's what we'll be looking for going forward is, can that budget riddle be solved?
Yeah, I just quickly, oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to quickly add, Ben, that I think the states that you see that have the most success in the innovation space have really cooperative governance on this topic between the executive and legislative branches. It's really tough to maintain 10 to 15 years of solid innovation, investment without real investment by the state legislature, but also real leadership in prioritizing this by the executive branch. So you really need them both.
And I think that's right at the heart of what I was going to ask is that, so if it took us some 10 years to get into this hole, I think one of the concerns always is if it took us 10 years to get in the hole, it'll take us 10 years, if not 20 years to get out of that hole. But it really seems like your recommendations are a spark plug here, that it's not going to take a decade to undo this trend.
That's a great point, Ben. I mean, we don't think the state has 15 years to wait. And we don't think that modern and industrial policy, modern innovation policy requires that. A lot of our recommendations are tied to these almost shock surges of investment into places. We think there are good ideas laying on the table. The Resolve initiative that has been emerging in your region needs to be funded. It's a sophisticated, nationally significant proposal. And I think we have seen a number of these around the state. So I think the first thing is resolving this funding challenge. And as Rob is saying, we think that could be a bipartisan discourse. I think that could be, there was significant bipartisan interest in our first report just before the pandemic. And we think that this has traditionally been an area where you could have a convergence and a decision by both parties to do something now. And we think to push these surges of both, the bully pulpit, a lot of talk about this, promotion of a vision, but then these near-term investments at scale in places.
So I want to turn attention because the JES is based in Erie County up in the northwest of Pennsylvania. So I want to turn attention locally for a second because one of the things that really caught my attention in the report and because I've been aware of it and impressed by it, but then also it's a dedicated full page taking a look at the Northwest Pennsylvania Innovation Beehive Network, and really you call that out as an example. So in looking specifically to Erie County, Mark, I wanted to ask you what you find to be the three biggest challenges and what you find to be the three biggest opportunities that we have, because with the Beehive Network, we're lauding Pennsylvania with its research institutions, yet our county does not have an R1 university, but we have this ecosystem where they've come together to really form that. So what other opportunities do you see a place like Erie County having? What challenges do you see that are right in front of us that we've got to address right now?
Well, so the Beehive is a perfect example of sophisticated ecosystem-based, cluster development. And you've already been developing it. So it shows the capacity, the ability that we think exists in a lot of the medium-sized cities in Pennsylvania. So that's a starting point. I look at a couple things. I think that you have challenges with cash, governance, and connection. Those are the kind of three things I think. It's always tough to scare up the funds to advance these great ideas, including Beehive, but then Resolve especially. And that's where we think these regions need investment. You really have been operating without it. And we're seeing more states are beginning to, step up with supports and investments in their region. So, you have ideas ready to go. You need some support from the state to accelerate their development. There is, though, a true need to work on capacity, governance, making sure that you're not arguing about things as you execute. We think there's a real capacity for that in the region, but we know that governance hasn't always been easy here in Erie County. So that's the second one. And then connection is something that is both a challenge but an opportunity. I mean, you are out here in a corner of the state, and you're distant from the major hubs, but you're not that distant, and we're beginning to see these linkages around health and electrification with CMU or other institutions in Pittsburgh. So we see opportunities there, as well. Especially, I think your relationship with Pittsburgh has been deepening over time and maybe a real opportunity. I don't know, Rob, is there anything you want to add here?
I think that's kind of exactly what I would have said, Mark. So yeah, I think those are the major themes that I think we both see.
So I'm gonna pull to an audience question for a second, because I think it fits really well here. In the Mark, you just mentioned Erie has strengthened and could stand to further strengthen its relationship to Pittsburgh. This person's asking, what other cities, counties, regions Erie might look to collaborate with, and they say that in the context of the Pennsylvania T, thinking across the top of the state and down through the middle, where we might have commonalities and we might have shared interests, that if we could pull resources and work together. Are you seeing room for collaboration outside of just the Western corridor?
Yeah, absolutely. And we did not examine carefully how each place could connect up, but I think there are the examples. The Pennsylvania Wild example is one showing of a creative, thoughtful interaction across a lot of counties, in the sort of moving tourism to up a higher value level, and orienting wilderness and conservation values. So I think these are opportunities that are out there. But it takes a real mindset to think that you can value innovation with different partners. I do think that there's no way around the importance of Pittsburgh. And meanwhile, some of this is being incentivized by the federal grants that the big universities are involved in, that are now demanding, interaction with regions, rural areas, and second and third level size places. So that's now, there could be a help coming through that tying that we're seeing in some of the federal grants.
Mark, you brought it up, but Rob, I want to ask you, what's the most pressing thing in this report that rural communities in Pennsylvania should take away? What are the high points for them that they need to focus on now and that they need to be paying attention to in the long term?
Yeah, I just kind of say two things there. And one of them maybe is building off the last question too, around the regions that Erie should be thinking about. I think one of the needs here for rural and smaller regions is to think about their role in supply chain embeddedness with urban innovation centers. And that's not just Pittsburgh,
Right.
it could be Philadelphia, it could be places in Ohio, right, or Southern New York. And so, I think that there's this I mentioned the moment we're in right now, as the US thinks about how to structure its supply chains of the future. Federal legislation is incentivizing a lot of this. In particular, you see that in the CHIPS and Science Act, you see that in the Inflation Reduction Act. And there's a real moment here for smaller regions to take advantage of that, and in particular, Pennsylvania's smaller regions, because they have this legacy of both manufacturing and energy production. And I think that is a really strong base to build off of for this state's smaller regions. So that's one. And I think that also can shape how the Erie region thinks about who it partners with beyond just Pittsburgh. But the second, and this is not going to be a surprise, and we've already talked about it in this session, is this real need for regional thinking. Erie is doing some of this. We've talked about the Beehive. We think that's just like a really exemplary point that the region can bring up. But in general, smaller communities as a whole should be thinking about how they can plan their economies on a regional level. And in that type of regional embeddedness is really needed to compete with larger places, both in Pennsylvania, but also nationally, moving forward here. And so you see that happening in some other states, which we can talk about, but that type of regional thinking we think is really crucial.
And I think to the Erie point, one of the great things that the report mentions is the conversations in place now of the Beehive network extending down to Crawford County, just to Erie South, through Allegheny College, and then really strengthening, as Mark was saying, and Rob, you've touched on, that I-79 corridor on Western Pennsylvania of how can we work all the way down to Pittsburgh and beyond, because I say the county I grew up in, Greene County, the far southwestern county, I saw it in green. It's on the trend up. It's heading upward in your map. So that gives me encouragement for my home county. Turning back to audience questions, we're building a toolkit. And let's say that you could each put 2 to 3 tools in your toolkit as we set off to work. This person's asking, what policy tools would be best used to direct investment towards stimulating rural innovation efforts? What do you put in your toolkits?
I would say a supportive state grant program, something substantial to get a little resource into this. I mean, I think we spent decades attempting programs that remain small ball, and then we have to wonder why they don't move the dial. So we have to try some things at scale. They have to be evaluated. They have to be, scrutinized. We think that there's a greater knowledge of what some of the things that work, and there are a lot of good ideas out there. But I think there's no substitute for some flexible funding.
Mark, what goes into your toolkit? Or Rob, sorry, what goes into your toolkit?
Yeah, I just had 2 things. The first, and this is kind of one step removed, I think that there really needs to be, in addition to investment from the state into flexible federal funding for regions, there needs to be discussion around continuing to invest in the state's higher education research capacity, especially outside of the big R1s. And I think that conversation has been missing in recent years. Pennsylvania is a place that has, by some measures, the most regional public universities of any state in the United States. But it's also, a state that has seen a higher ed system in many ways in crisis. There's a lot of evidence around the importance, the central role of higher education in innovation ecosystems. That has to be part of it. And then I'd say just like one low-hanging fruit, because I know Mark and I just named some pretty, robust investments, is, an innovation voucher program, something that can let companies in smaller communities that are doing the type of private sector R&D, that are doing the type of, work and product development and bringing research to market that needs to be done by the private sector, helping those companies in smaller communities access that research and expertise that is at, the research intensive universities in the state. Right now, there's not as many opportunities for private sector companies to access that type of research as there should be in Pennsylvania. And any policies to facilitate that will be helpful.
And Rob, that's a great point, because one not a question, but just a comment from the audience. They love the voucher program. They love that idea and concept. So something we want to touch on there. Earlier, I mentioned the flatlining or middling, and I think the thing that concerns me the most is that if Pennsylvania continues to just middle line this and other states are shooting up, we're getting farther and farther from our peers, right? So, Rob, what can we do, right now to get away from middling as other states? What other peers might we look to? Examples that we might, seek out that, Pennsylvania can say, this state's gotten it right. We need to look at some of their models. We need to scale it to us. We need to make it adaptable. Rob, can we start with you, and then Mark will go to you. What can we do to get out of the middling the most and the quickest so that we don't lose our place with those that are going to trend up?
Right.
Yeah, I'll just cite 2 examples. The first is, looking at actually Indiana, which is an interesting case study. It's a very red state, right? Republican controlled state legislature, Republican governor. But in their most recent budget, or I should say the 2021 budget, the state's General Assembly appropriated $500 million for a regional development program called READY. So they allotted $500 million to 17 regions across the state to support things like anchor institutions, educational institutions, economic development organizations, to create regional economic development plans with kind of innovation and placemaking at the center of that. And it was so popular that the state legislature is looking at appropriating another $500 million to go toward this plan in their next budget. So here we have a state that is by all accounts a small government, low tax, pro-business state that understands the need to invest in regions. So that's one. And then the second is, and it's kind of on the other end of the spectrum. And it's also kind of funny because like everyone kind of writes the state off now as a national leader that Pennsylvania could never be like, but it's actually, Massachusetts. If you look at Massachusetts, it didn't necessarily need to become a national innovation leader. But the reason it did was really a couple things. The first is, the state has invested, $1.5 billion over the last 15 years in this massive statewide Massachusetts Life Biosciences initiative. That was a bipartisan initiative started by a Democratic governor, Deval Patrick, continued by a Republican, Charlie Baker, kind of cooperation between a Republican governor and a Democratic state legislature. We kind of take it for granted that Massachusetts was always going to be a leader, but that didn't necessarily need to be the case. I think people just say, well, Boston's got all these universities, there's no way we compete. I mean, look at every city in Pennsylvania. You can find an analogous situation throughout Pennsylvania for every asset that Massachusetts has. But what they did was they took those assets and they invested, and they not only invested in Boston, they invested in kind of second cities, think places like Worcester, places like Lowell, including with, not just cluster development, but things like transportation access, connectivity to the major innovation hubs in the state from the kind of secondary hubs. And all of that has created the ecosystem that exists there now. That was a deliberate policy choice. And, this is my last note, and then I'll let, Mark hop in here. But the other thing that Massachusetts did was in, the late 90s, they decided they were going to publish an annual innovation strategy. They called it the Index of the Massachusetts Innovation Economy. And they started publishing it, I think it was in 1999, and they publish it every year for the last 2 decades. And they do an update. And this is done through kind of a quasi-public organization called Mass Tech. It's like kind of it's a tech-focused kind of rough equivalent to almost like a Team PA. And they publish this every year. And so it's not deliberate. It is deliberate. It is not an accident that Massachusetts ended up where they did. And it was a 2-decade initiative.
Right.
It's easy to see the progress when you're tracking it. It's easy to see the blind spots when you're tracking it. I think that's something that, by gosh, Pennsylvania needs to adopt like yesterday. Mark, what do you have to add with peer states, how we keep pace with them, we stop the meddling, we don't flatline? Your thoughts, and then I want to sneak in at least one more audience question.
Sure, I love frogs. I'll add Colorado, another actually state with a constitutional amendment limiting tax increases. So a tough fiscal environment. They creatively found funding to create something called the Advanced Industry Accelerator Program that makes small and medium-sized and even larger, what they call infrastructure grants into, fledgling innovation companies. It's worked great. It's been oversubscribed every year they've done it. They've added a sort of rural orient or a sort of rest of state dimension. It's a huge success. So, again, they figured it out. Pennsylvania, we think can figure this stuff out. And in fact, we think that something like that should be structured to make investments in the ecosystems of places. But you also need that for investment for, creative firms. So lots of ideas out there.
Yeah, and speaking of ideas, this is somebody working in the front lines on this asks, well, first says, and then asks, the Beehive Network and other local services serve this region, specifically this region being Erie County and the Northwest region of Pennsylvania, specifically, which is relatively low in population. How do you suggest that we, the folks asking this question, we work with a larger city without getting overwhelmed by their population's needs? We have ideas, but it is a clear risk to those who serve in this region that their projects could be overshadowed.
I think that's a very astute concern. I will say that in some of these federal challenges now, there are very strict, criteria that places be truly inclusive of smaller places. And I think that is going to be part of some of these going forward now. So I think that more and more there's a view that places of different sizes need to be able to interact together, and there are protections will be coming in place. But I think that's a real issue. But I think the upside of attempting those collaborations outweighs the fear of being overwhelmed. But I take the point. I think it's a great point.
And so many great points that we can get to, but unfortunately the timing just won't allow us here, which is why I want to recommend again people head over to brookings.edu to find your excellent report, or just check the event page here to find a link to it. Also wonderful, thoughtful executive summary, and plenty of other resources on this. But the final question I want to ask both of you, because we just turned to somebody who's working in this. So I want to ask the question, but looking at it through two different lenses. Mark, I want to ask you what the most important takeaways are for those working on policy at the state and local levels. And Rob, I want to turn to you to say, what's the most important takeaway for residents? What can residents do about this? Community activists, citizens, and people plugged into this conversation. Mark, what can those actively working on it? What would be the most important takeaways they can take right now as they go and look at the report and read it for the first time, or reread it for the second or 17th time? What's top of mind for you for the policymakers, Rob? Then what's top of mind for you for the residents, Mark?
Yeah, I'll distill it first to that commitment. The state has simply got to make this important, talk about it a lot, sell it, and not accept being an also-ran in innovation. So that's the first one. And the other one is figure out some way to create, an flexible pool of funding to put behind ecosystem building in big cities and smaller regions. Those two things are to me, two of the cruxes. I don't know. What do you
Mark,
say?
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, one, if anyone's read the report 17 times, please let us know, because I think Mark and I have read the report 17 times. For residents, the most important takeaways for residents, I'd just say two things. The first is innovation matters for everyone. It matters. It's not this ivory tower abstract concept. It matters for normal people every day, because innovation leads to new job creation, new firm creation, and stronger wages for people throughout the Commonwealth. So that's point number one. And then point number two is it's okay to ask your state to do more for you. The status quo around this clearly is not working. The state can be doing more, it should be doing more, and it's okay to ask for that.
Mark Muro, Rob Maxim of Brookings Metro, and co-authors with Yang Yu of Commonwealth of Innovation, a policy agenda for revitalizing Pennsylvania's economic dynamism. Thank you for taking complex ideas here and making them accessible and understandable, and taking complex ideas in your report and making them accessible. We're looking forward to those policymakers getting those changes in place. We're looking forward to those residents holding their state government accountable, their local government accountable, to get things done for them, to jumpstart jumpstart Pennsylvania's innovation economy. Thank you so very much, the both of you, for joining us for this conversation. And of course, a million thanks to you, the audience, for tuning in, whether you were watching live with us as we record this event, or if you're streaming later on demand accessing JES programming. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Without you, these programs and discussions would not be possible in the exchange and flow of ideas. Folks, for more information about the JES, including how to register for additional events, please visit our website, jeserie.org. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For more of what Mark and Rob are doing, head over to brookings.edu and follow them on all of the social platforms as well, wherever you like to consume your information. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Speggen. Thanks for listening and learning with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.